Good evening. Whatever the reasons, it was a decision for which she was hugely criticised. The day after the Grenfell fire, Theresa May did not meet with survivors but chose instead to visit emergency services. Today, almost 1 year on, the Prime Minister admitted that, and the government's response was not good enough. In a newspaper article, Mrs May said that by not meeting residents that day, it made it seem as though she didn't care and that was never the case. Now, as survivors prepare for the first anniversary of the fire, they say her words are at least a step in the right direction. More from our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
The moment Theresa May misjudged the mood, she must have realised it instantly. The Prime Minister was loudly booed as she made a hasty exit from a church near Grenfell Tower in the aftermath of the tragedy. Such was the anger of local residents, police had to form a human shield to stop the crowd confronting her. It's taken almost a year for Downing Street to admit the Prime Minister got it wrong. Her biggest mistake, not meeting survivors and other residents during that first visit. Today, in a newspaper article, Mrs May attempted to put things right. She says it has long been clear that the initial response was not good enough. I include myself in that. The residents of Grenfell Tower needed to know that those in power recognised and understood their despair. And I will always regret that by not meeting them that day, it seemed as though I didn't care. That was never the case. The tone of Mrs May's new message is in stark contrast to how she viewed her response last October. Do you accept your reluctance to meet some of the survivors immediately was clumsy and insensitive?
No, I went to the hospital at a very early stage to meet some of the victims, and I've met residents on a number of occasions.
It came across that you were insensitive. And you've heard this term Maybot used.
Yeah, I don't think, you see, I don't think it should be an issue about me or what I was doing. I think it should be an issue about whether government was there to help and support people. And
so
that's what we did.
You got that wrong?
Well, I did meet people.
Clary Mendy lost two cousins in the fire. She's met Mrs May and accepts her apology.
Well, she did make a blunder. And I'm sure if she could turn back time, she would, but we cannot turn the clock back. But guess what? We can go forward. We learn. We cannot change yesterday, but we can shape our tomorrow. As long as she's willing to listen to the community, because I believe some of her advisors misadvised her as well.
But some are less forgiving.
I was working with one survivor group who waited 4 months to meet her. It's, I don't know, it's a bit convenient that it's this week. Does it take a whole year to realise that you've done something insensitive? I don't know.
The last 12 months have been a long journey for survivors, bereaved relatives and other residents. It seems it's been something of a journey for the Prime Minister too.
Simon, a very different sentiment today from when you spoke to Theresa May back in October last year, and especially the days that followed the fire. Why do you think this is? Well,
this time last year, the Prime Minister was reeling from her election disaster, having thrown away her parliamentary majority. Politically, she was on the ropes to her growing number of critics within her own party. Her dismal performance over Grenfell was yet another example of her tin ear, her lack of the political instinct and human touch that you need to be a successful political leader. And by the time of the Conservative conference in October, when I asked her about Grenfell, she was still vulnerable, clearly still on the defensive, and that was before her coughing fit. But she has survived against the odds, and it is still relatively rare for a politician in her position to apologise publicly.
But Simon, this week in particular, she really cannot afford to put a step wrong, can she?
Yes, Downing Street will be treading very carefully. It's not clear what role she'll have on the anniversary itself, but we know tomorrow she's inviting local primary children to plant bushes in the back garden of Downing Street, and on Thursday night, number 10 itself will be lit up green.
All right, Simon Harris, thank you.
Next tonight, the financial problems facing Transport for London have been known for a while, with a black hole in its budget of almost £1 billion. But today, it denied that amounted to a crisis, telling the London Assembly that it has a plan to balance the books within 3 years. Our political correspondent, Simon Harris, is at Russell Square Tube Station this evening. Simon, does this mean the Mayor's Freres freeze is in trouble?
Leader Sadiq Khan says he's determined to stick to his fares freeze for the duration of his first term as mayor. But the number of people using the tube and buses is falling, and Transport for London is forecast to lose £968 million this year. TfL bosses say efficiency savings will turn that into a profit by 2022. London Assembly members aren't convinced. Labour's Len Duval suggested one answer might be a toll for traffic using the Rotherhithe tunnel. And TfL's Chief Financial Officer Simon Killenback drew gasps from the Assembly when he insisted there is no crisis.
The first thing I think I'd say is we're not in a financial crisis. We planned for this level of deficit, and we have a plan that we believe that we'll deliver. And we've shown that we can deliver over the last 2 years, and you'll judge us on our delivery.
So when does a deficit of this magnitude become a crisis or not?
Well, it's not a crisis in as much as we knew it was coming and we planned for it, and we are delivering our budgets. Yeah. We've delivered our budgets for the last 2 years. Yeah. We will deliver our budget this year.
Half of all transactions on the tube are made using one of these, an Oyster card. But did you know, Nina, that every time someone uses an Oyster card, it costs TfL 10 pence, whereas if you use one of these, a contactless card, it costs just 1 pence. But despite that, TfL insisted today that it has no plans to scrap the Oyster card, which is already 15 years old. Nina.
Goodness, Simon Harris, thank you. The fire here exposed the vast inequalities in this borough and has led to much anger directed towards Kensington and Chelsea Council. Its leader told us she can understand that anger and the frustration at the length of time that it's taking to find new homes for all the survivors.
I think that's slightly understandable. If I'd lost my child or my mother or my father, or in some cases my whole family, and in the most terrifying circumstances, and then I was going back to the people who I held responsible for that and asking them for a new home or for support, I think I'd find it very difficult to trust them.
So when will everyone be rehoused?
Well, we're not going to put any sort of false dates or any more deadlines or anything like that. We're just going to work with the families. We've got 90% of the properties, and 90% of them have accepted them, and then we'll work with them at their pace to move in.
The fire at Grenfell is likely to change much in the country, with the inquiry into how and why it took hold due to resume next week. It's been the subject of heated political debate over the last year, and Simon Harris will be looking at the issues on tonight's late debate programme in Westminster. So, Simon, a year on, many answers to be questioned over this disaster.
Yes, Suzanne, and much of the anger generated by the Grenfell Tower tragedy has been directed at politicians. Tonight on the late debate, we'll be asking the politicians what they have learned from the Grenfell community and what the disaster tells us about social housing.
Residents from Grenfell, the survivors, are telling us that they felt that they weren't being listened to, and so we have to listen to that and we have to accept that as truth.
A lot of people still think, why haven't we taken quicker action to rehouse those people, and also why is cladding of that kind not banned?
We'll also be talking to the former Labour Transport Secretary Lord Adonis about the railway timetable fiasco, which is putting even more of a strain on commuters who use Thameslink and Great Northern trains. So join me tonight, if you can, to watch the late debate here on ITV at 11:15.
Simon in Westminster, thank you.